just wanted to offer a few more points on actually experientially what it's like to work from wholeness rather than working from the sense of the conventional self or the ego, you could say. The first point would be that in working with wholeness, we emphasize our subjective side of the experience. So, what that means is the way we're looking at a problem becomes perhaps even more important than the problem itself. This may be where psychotherapy and spirituality part ways in some way, if there is a distinction. When we're looking at how we're looking at the problem, we're including the subject, um, the parts of us, say, that are looking at parts with a particular view. Some of the views that trip us up are the wish to fix ourselves, um, judgment of certain parts being better than others, or sort of dividing ourselves against ourselves in a certain way. So, traditional psychotherapy, at least, and there are exceptions, tends to focus on the problem itself and resolving it. Whereas a view of wholeness, we take interest in what is looking or who is looking and how are we looking at the problem, because that tends to be problematic in itself more often. A second distinction is that when we're looking from wholeness, we don't see parts as broken, we actually see them as whole. Or we're interested and curious and compassionate towards parts in a way that we are wanting to know what their wisdom is. There really are no bad parts from a perspective of wholeness. And so, as we move our subjectivity from wholeness, we are actually looking to include more parts of ourselves rather than uh, obscure them or fix them in any way. The other point that kind of gets overlooked is from wholeness, there's a recognition that parts are actually trying to organize themselves developmentally. So there are parts of us that are sort of younger than others. There are parts that are more complex than others. And let's just take an example of like a very early um, psychological issue. Maybe in some schools we could call it chakra 1, which is based on survival and safety, versus a chakra 3 issue, which is based on will and power. Wholeness knows that the specific qualities needed to heal those two distinct issues needs different attention, different qualities. Qualities of safety are very different from qualities of power. So we can be more targeted and distinct in how we're looking at issues with a kind of emergent wisdom that's developmentally informed. And finally, when we're working from wholeness, we're we're kind of out of the way, you could say. The parts of us that are fixers or aggressive or very attached to other parts, being held up in certain ways. The recognition from wholeness is that we're more of a process than a noun. So, in other words, there's an unfoldment occurring rather than an agenda. This makes all the difference. There's a great freedom and resolution in parts when they're allowed to be themselves and to arise more organically within a field of wholeness rather than a field of any sort of agenda whatsoever.